The blizzard hit without warning, turning the Montana sky into a swirling wall of white. Jake Mitchell had been riding for 3 days straight, tracking a missing cattle shipment that never arrived at the railhead. Now, as darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, he knew he'd made a fatal miscalculation. The old homestead he'd spotted on his map should have been abandoned, a relic from the homesteading days. But as his horse stumbled through knee-deep snow toward the weathered structure, he saw smoke rising from the chimney. He knocked hard, his knuckles nearly frozen solid. The door cracked open and a rifle barrel emerged first, followed by the most determined pair of green eyes he'd ever seen. The woman holding the weapon couldn't have been more than 25, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, her worn dress covered by a man's oversized coat. She looked him up and down with the same careful assessment he'd give a horse at auction. "I mean no harm, ma'am," Jake said, his voice hoarse from the cold. "My horse is about done, and I won't last another hour in this weather. I'm asking for shelter, nothing more. I can sleep in your barn if you've got one." She stared at him for a long moment, then glanced past him at the whiteout conditions. "Barn collapsed last winter. You'll freeze out there?" She lowered the rifle slightly but kept it ready. "I suppose you can come in, but I'm keeping this nearby, and I'm a better shot than most men I know." Jake nodded and led his horse to the lean-to attached to the cabin, giving the animal what little hay remained before stumbling inside. The cabin was small but surprisingly warm, a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. He noticed immediately that there was only one room, one chair, one table, and one bed in the corner. The woman had returned to stirring a pot over the fire. "I'm Sarah Brennan. This was my husband's claim. He died of pneumonia last winter." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but Jake caught the tremor beneath it. "I've been running it alone since." "Jake Mitchell." "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am." He removed his hat, snow falling from its brim. "I'll make myself small, sleep by the fire here." She ladled out 2 bowls of thin stew, mostly potatoes and onions with a hint of salt pork. They ate in silence, the wind howling outside like a wounded animal. As the hours passed, the temperature inside the cabin dropped despite the fire. Jake fed it constantly, but the old wood was damp, and the gaps in the walls let in fingers of deadly cold. Around midnight, Sarah stood from the bed where she'd been lying fully clothed under a pile of threadbare blankets. "This is foolish," she said. "That fire won't last till morning, and you'll freeze to death 3 feet from where I'm sleeping." She met his startled gaze directly. "Share my bed or freeze. Those are your options." Jake felt his face flush despite the cold. "Ma'am, I couldn't. Your reputation." "My reputation?" She laughed, a bitter sound. "I'm a widow running a failed homestead in the middle of nowhere. The nearest neighbor is 15 miles away, and they think I'm crazy for staying." "My reputation is already decided?" Her expression softened slightly. "I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm suggesting we pool our warmth and both survive the night. I've seen men freeze to death before. It's not pretty, and I won't have it on my conscience." Jake understood then what this cost her. Not her virtue, but her pride. To admit she needed help, even in this small way, went against everything she'd been fighting for since her husband died. He nodded slowly. "Thank you, ma'am." "I'm grateful." They arranged themselves awkwardly, both fully clothed, sharing the blankets and what warmth they could generate. At first they lay rigid, careful not to touch more than necessary. But as the night deepened and the cold intensified, survival instinct overcame propriety. They moved closer, sharing heat in the most basic human way. In the darkness, Sarah began to talk. She spoke of her husband, a dreamer who'd believed in this land even as it broke him. She spoke of the loneliness, the daily battle against nature and despair, the vegetables she'd coaxed from the rocky soil, the chickens that had somehow survived. She spoke of her determination to prove that his dream hadn't been in vain, even as common sense screamed at her to leave. Jake found himself talking too, sharing things he'd never told anyone. His own losses, his younger brother who died in a ranching accident, the guilt he carried, the way work had become his escape from feeling anything at all. When dawn broke, the blizzard had passed, leaving the world buried in pristine white. Jake rose stiffly, his clothes finally dry from the shared warmth. Sarah was already up, coaxing the fire back to life. "The storm's done," he said unnecessarily. I should get moving. She nodded, not looking at him. Safe travels, but Jake found himself hesitating. He looked at this woman who'd chosen survival over pride, compassion over fear, who'd saved his life while protecting her own dignity and his. In one night, he'd seen more courage than in most men's entire lives. I'm heading back to the Carlson Ranch, he said slowly. They're always looking for good hands. Pays decent. If you wanted, I could put in a word, help you find work. You could sell this place, start somewhere new. Sarah turned, her eyes sharp. I don't need charity. No, man, you don't. You need options, and sometimes accepting help isn't weakness. It's wisdom, he smiled slightly. You taught me that last night. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled back, small but genuine. Maybe I did, she extended her hand. Thank you, Jake Mitchell. He shook it firmly. Thank you, Sarah Brennan. As Jake rode away, he glanced back once. She stood in the doorway, watching him go, and he knew somehow that this wouldn't be their last meeting. Sometimes fate worked in mysterious ways, bringing people together in their darkest moments to show them light still existed. Sometimes survival required trust. And sometimes the greatest acts of courage happened in the smallest gestures, in the quiet decision to choose compassion when fear would be easier, to offer warmth when coldness seemed safer. The story of that night would stay with both of them forever. A reminder that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in standing alone, but in knowing when to reach out, when to accept help, and when to recognize that we all need each other to survive the storms life brings.